Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Laura Kohler, Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Kohler.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Greenbuild's Master Speaker Series. Give thought, take action. Give thought, take action. This is the message behind Kohler Stewardship's, Kohler Company's Corporate Social Responsibility Program. It is a message for every one of our 30,000 associates around the world. We ask them to give thought and take action to affect the communities where they live and work. Today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk about a woman who has made an impact around the world. She has used her courageous journalistic abilities as she's partnered with her husband, Nicholas Kristof, to tell deeply disturbing stories of girls and women and the pervasiveness of the global sex trade. She has made the world sit up, pay attention. She has used her storytelling to become an agent for change. She has asked all of us to essentially give thought and take action. The more they looked, the more they found very, very painful situations, really unbelievable to most of us. I'm a Senior Vice President of Human Resources. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, and I'm a mother of 3 girls. I have had an amazing opportunity in my professional life to travel to many places around this planet. We have over 50 manufacturing locations across 6 continents, and I have traveled to these communities. I have seen schools in India where the girls stopped coming to school because there wasn't a toilet and they couldn't be there for the whole day. I have seen disabled school children from a boarding school talk about their stories of going back to their village in the summertime and there wasn't a structured toilet facility and they had to drag themselves across the ground long distances to find a private place. I have seen a school where the center courtyard is a pond of raw sewage. Kohler associates have stepped up in each one of these situations, providing toilet facilities for girls at a school in Gurgaon, India. In another, talking with a community about how they could provide more structured sanitation. And a third, by removing that pond of foul water so that the children had a place to play. These are just small actions that make a difference in someone's life. These are stories that our associates are proud of. It has been their initiative. Sheryl WuDunn's book has touched adults, my college student, high school students, and has been made even more accessible because of the documentary series. Hillary Clinton commented in the first documentary of the series, and she said that the role and rights of women and their freedom, equality, and dignity is the unfinished business of the 21st century. Wow. Sheryl WuDunn's work is tremendously important. Our corporate mission is to improve the lives of people who are touched by our products and services. That has no global, no cultural or class boundaries. It has been ingrained in our company DNA, our collective spirit, and it compels everyone to believe that we can be better. We can act with generosity, integrity, and kindness toward each other, our customers, and our communities. At Kohler, we're confident in our talents and our abilities to get things done. We do so, but we don't do it for the headlines, but because it is the right thing to do. We temper our confidence with humility, and we recognize that none of us can be successful or make a positive mark if we're not working together, in harmony, giving thought and taking action. We believe in better. So whether we're developing water-efficient plumbing products or volunteering to rehab a school in Reynosa, Mexico, or organizing the planting of 1 million trees in China, We endeavor wherever we are to be better and to make a positive difference in business and to become vital and compassionate citizens of the world. The work of Sheryl WuDunn is empowering. She has empowered me and inspired me. She is a leader on a crusade for women's rights. She's an example of someone who takes action every day. She has inspired and engaged our generation. If you educate a girl, she can change the world around her. And when you educate a girl, you educate a village, and anything is possible. If we all strive to believe in a better way, to strive to give thought and take action, we can all make an impact on this world, and our future depends on it. Thank you.
Good morning. Happy Greenbuild. First, I'm Marge Anderson. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Energy Center of Wisconsin, so I'm really excited to thank Kohler for their sponsorship of Greenbuild, of Sheryl WuDunn's Master Speaker address that you'll be hearing, and for their great corporate social responsibility work, another fine Wisconsin company. I serve on the board of directors of the U.S. Green Building Council, and in January I will have the honor of serving you as chair-elect of the board. Oh, thank you. You rock. I'm very pleased to welcome you today, and it is my honor to introduce Sheryl WuDunn. I'm going to say a disclaimer. Her book was tremendously powerful for me on an emotional level and on a mobilizing level, and so I might get a little misty. So that's my disclaimer. Sheryl WuDunn is the first Asian American reporter to win a Pulitzer Prize. She's a best-selling author, a business leader, and the president of a social investing consultancy. Many of you have read Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, or you've seen her TED Global talk on the impact of investment in girls' education and her call to action to fight the central moral challenge of our time, the status of women and girls in poor, rural, and developing areas across the globe. Half the Sky had a profound effect on me personally. Sheryl's powerful storytelling illuminates the magnitude of challenges women and girls face. Slavery in numbers that eclipse the 19th century slave trade in the United States, women's staggering mortality in the face of health situations that we take for granted here in the developed world, but most importantly, the hope and the opportunity that small investments in girls' education can make in transforming whole communities. For Half the Sky is ultimately a hopeful and an optimistic challenge to us to realize the world's potential by enabling women and girls to reach their full potential. The U.S. Green Building Council, with its powerful women, and it's a good day for women, isn't it? We had our Women in Green Power Breakfast. We're ending our day with probably the most qualified human being on the planet. So, ladies, let's hear that roar. USGBC, with its powerful women and its deeply caring men, with our commitment to green buildings for everyone within a generation, and our emerging economic strength, we have much to contribute to this challenge. We're gathered here today in Philadelphia, and this week is the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address, which was delivered here in Pennsylvania. So I think Abraham Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address at a turning point in the American Civil War and our own struggle to realize the full potential of all Americans. It is also a sobering commentary on the people who died on both sides of the struggle to advance liberty. I think it's fitting to honor Sheryl's call to action and the women and girls Sheryl has sought to liberate with these words from the Gettysburg Address. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. I hope that you will be inspired by Sheryl WuDunn's example to dedicate yourself to this cause. Now please join me in the great honor of welcoming Sheryl WuDunn to Greenbuild.
Greetings. Hello. I'm so embarrassed by that comparison and mention of Lincoln. So thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. It's a beautiful day, and I look forward to taking you around the world. Before I do, I just want to find out how much some of you have traveled. I know that you build things all around the world. So how many of you have been to Zimbabwe? Oh, okay, we have some. How many have been to Pakistan? Okay, we have a well-traveled group. Well, I am going to start in one of my favorite places, and that is China. This photo was taken a few months ago. Well, let me just give you an idea. That little boy on top of my husband's shoulders is now in college. I'm very flattered. It just goes to show how quickly kids grow up in a few months. But this is China. This is Tiananmen Square. So for those of you who have been to China, you probably have been to Tiananmen Square. But you know, this is not the real China. I want to take you to the real China. Here. This is Dai Manju. She's 13 years old at the time the story starts. And she lives in a tiny little village with no road access in Hebei province. And she lives with her parents, her two brothers, and her great aunt. They live in a hut that has no running water, no electricity, no refrigerator, no bicycle, no radio, and they share this great splendor with a very large pig. So Dai Manju was 13 years old, about to go into the 6th grade, and her parents had to pay $13 in school fees to have her go to school. But they thought, you know, wow, that's a lot of money for us. And Dai Manju is going to be spending the rest of her life probably in the rice paddies or doing household chores at home. Why would we want to waste our money on her? So they yanked her out of school. It just so happens that Dai Manju was the best pupil in her grade. So you know how hard that is to be, you know, rise to the top, right? So she was devastated. She actually made the 2-hour trek to school every day anyway, just to sit outside the schoolhouse, hopefully get some books that people were throwing away because she couldn't afford her own. And so we wrote about her in the New York Times. We got a flood of responses, and many of them contained checks, mostly for $13. New York Times readers are very generous in tiny amounts. But then we got a money transfer for $10,000. $10,000. Wow, that was a lot of money. We thought, my goodness, well, let's give this to the man in the photo who was the principal of the school. He was overjoyed. He thought, oh my goodness, not only can I give Dai Manju a scholarship, I can give all the other girls a scholarship. I can give the boys a scholarship. I can renovate the schoolhouse. He was just delighted. So as Dai Manju was finishing up 6th grade, we thought, why don't we give the donor a progress report? I mean, after all, what a great thing that he's done. He'd be happy to hear this. So we called up the donor. We said, sir, we want to thank you for your generosity. You've no idea how far $10,000 goes in poor rural China. Well, there was a pause at the other end of the line. He said, I didn't give $10,000. I gave $100. Well, this was a problem. We were good investigative journalists, you see. We spotted this problem. But we really were worried about what this meant. There was this grave mistake, and you know the money was already been spent, and so we actually did some digging, and we discovered that there was a bank clerk at the bank who had a slight problem with decimal points. Actually, Nick and I later thought that he probably was transferred to the Department for Subprime Mortgages. But we actually had to figure out what to do because we were very worried that, you know, this money had already been spent. So we talked about it, and I'm glad none of you here are journalists because this is not something that we were proud of doing as journalists. We knew a senior official at the bank. It happened to be Morgan Guaranty Trust Bank. And so we called him up. And we said, sir, we explained the problem. And we said, you know, we're doing a follow-up story. And you get the message, right? And we'd like to know, are you going to send your bankers out to this tiny little village to take your money back and throw all the girls out of school again? Well, the guy said, you know, on the record, under the circumstances, we are delighted to make a donation for the difference. So there you have it. So, of course, all of the girls, Dai Manju and her classmates, they went to middle school. They went to high school. Dai Manju went to vocational school for accounting. She went down south to the southern province of Guangdong to actually get a job at a factory as an accountant. And then she got a salary. She started sending money back. We had a natural experiment in girls' education. Very, very interesting. It is very rare to get an exogenous investment in girls' education. So we saw what happened. So Dai Manju started sending money back. Her parents started saving. And then they started having enough money to build a new house. This time with running water, with electricity. They got a refrigerator, a bike. The pig moved outside. And Dai Manju's classmates were doing the same thing. They all went down to the southern province of Guangdong to get jobs. They started sending money back to their parents. Their parents started saving. And this village started flourishing. New houses. They understood the importance of education. And, of course, some of you may be thinking, oh, well, of course China was flourishing all over the country. And, yes, it was, but this village actually stood out. The government built a road linking the village to the rest of China. It stood out because they had educated their girls. And so that brings me to the first of two major tenets of Half the Sky. And the first is that we think the moral challenge of our time basically is the gender inequity. It's the brutality that so many women and girls face around the world because of their gender. So someone like Dai Manju, you know, in most parts of the developing world, it isn't what it takes to get ahead in school isn't so much how much IQ you have. It's what chromosomes do you have. In so many parts of the world, girls just aren't thought of enough to go to school. Now, we think that in the same way that the 19th century, slavery was the paramount challenge. In the 20th century, it was totalitarianism. The cause of our time, the moral challenge of our time, we think, is the gender inequity. Now, some of you might think, oh, my goodness, that's a huge statement to make. That's gross exaggeration, right? Well, I actually thought that in the beginning. I was very skeptical. But a number of things turned my thinking. So the first is, when you look at this girl, she is in a feeding center in Ethiopia. The rest of the feeding center was filled with girls just like her. What's remarkable is that her brothers are absolutely fine. The discrimination in the family took place to that extent. In India, boy and girl babies between 0 and 1 year of life survive about at the same rate because they're mostly breastfed and the breast shows no sun preference. But from 1 to 5 years of age, girls have a 30% higher mortality rate. And mind you, vaccinations are free. But they still have a 30% higher mortality rate than boys, partly because they don't get fed enough, undernourished, malnourished to death, and so they die at a higher rate. And that's true not only in India. The mortality rate is very high, but in other places there's a favoritism to boys, to the point where demographers, one of the most famous demographers, Amartya Sen, in this business, he's an economist who won a Nobel Prize, so he's a very rigorous economist. He and his team of demographers have come up with, looking at the global population, they estimate that there are anywhere between, well, actually, before I even tell you, let me take a quiz, a pop quiz. How many of you think there are more men or more women in the world today? More males or more females in the world today? Show of hands. How many of you think there are more males in the world today? A few, okay. How many of you think there are more females in the world today? Most of you, okay. Actually, you know, this second group, you're actually wrong. Yes, I know. Here in the U.S. and Europe, where females and males, boys and girls, men and women, have equal access to basically food, health care, nutrition. There are more women, we live longer. But that is not true in the rest of the world, in mostly the developing world. So what Amartya Sen discovered is that there are anywhere between 60 million and 110 million missing females from the current global population. And that tips the balance. It's a lot of people. 60 million is the size of Germany. So look at all that economic power in that country of 60 million, and those are the number of missing females. Think of the potential that we're not getting, the world is not seeing. So it's a huge, it is a huge issue. But that brings me to the second major tenet of Half the Sky. So let's put aside the morality of it all. Let's just not talk about right or wrong. We think that just for purely practical reasons, one of the most effective ways to help fight poverty and to even fight terrorism is to educate girls and bring women into the formal labor force. Basically, it's school and jobs. It's what really we here in this U.S., in this country, also, strive for. So true also in the developing world. So how does it fight poverty, for instance? Well, for instance, overpopulation is an issue. It's one of the most persistent contributors to poverty. So I was in Haiti a couple of years ago. Actually, I'm going to Haiti again this week. I met a woman there who had 11 children. Actually, she had 13, but 2 of them didn't make it. She had 11 children. When we met some of the kids that we saw there, they hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her husband didn't have steady work. He would go around the area looking for work, and when he did get some piecemeal work, he would come back and they had some money they could eat. But when he didn't come back, they didn't have money ran out, and then they didn't eat. So again, obviously, they're not educated. She doesn't know anything about contraceptives, so this is one of the issues that they face. They are actually now getting help. There are just a number of ways that if we educate the women, if the girls take their education through to adulthood, they tend to get married later on in life. They tend to have kids later on in life, and the kids they have fewer kids, and those fewer kids they tend to educate in a much better fashion. So there is a real payoff if you educate a girl, and you can actually address some of the issues of overpopulation. But the other thing that's really important is that, women really are part of the solution, not the problem. We shouldn't think of men and women, we shouldn't think of women and girls as part of this problem that we have. They really can be part of the solution. And it really gets down to something that Bill Gates said when he was traveling to Saudi Arabia. He was speaking to an audience much like you all. However, the difference was that here in this aisle, there was a physical barrier, and on this side there was men, on that side there was women, and they were covered. So there was a physical barrier. Someone here on this side of the room stood up and said, "Mr. Gates, we have here in Saudi Arabia a goal to become one of the top 10 countries when it comes to technology. Do you think we'll make it?" So Bill Gates, as he was staring at the audience, said, "If you're not fully utilizing half the human resources in your country, there is no way you will get anywhere near the top 10. So here is Bill of Arabia. But he really had a point, as you can tell. So I've talked a lot about these 2 major challenges. So I want to talk about some of the specific things on the agenda. What are some of the issues? One is trafficking. And I think, it was mentioned earlier. Laura mentioned trafficking, and it is a big issue. So what is sex trafficking? So here are some girls, sex workers in Cambodia. And they probably, were kidnapped when they were 13 years old, some as early as when they're 9, 10. They're taken away from their home village where, to the Phnom Penh, to the capital where they don't speak, the main dialect. They speak a dialect from the village. They are forced to work in a brothel 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. They're not paid a dime. And often they're not even fed that much because they don't want these girls to get fat. You know, that's kind of like slavery. It really is. And I don't make that comparison very lightly. Well, let's compare it to slavery that I mentioned in the 19th century, or actually earlier than that. Let's actually examine what we know as slavery. So back at the peak of the slave trade in the 1770s and the 1780s, the number of slaves who were transported from Africa to the New World each year, that number was 80,000 each year. It's very hard to come by figures, trafficking figures across international borders now because borders are so porous. But the State Department has estimated, very rough estimate, that each year there are probably 800,000 people transported across international borders. And that's a low estimate. Some people put it in the millions, low millions, maybe 1, 2 million. These girls would not even show up in those figures because they were never taken across a border. They were trafficked within their country, within Cambodia. And that's true of a lot of places, too. It's actually true of the U.S. as well. This is not just an international cross-border issue. This is also an intra-country issue that even happens here at home. The second figure that I'd like to look at is if you look at the value of a slave in the time of slavery here in the U.S., the slave was probably the second most valuable asset that a plantation owner had, the first being the land. But that slave was really contributing to economic output. And so it was very, very valuable. And in today's terms, if you gross up accounting for inflation, what that would be, that monetary value is like $30,000 to $40,000 per slave. That's a huge amount of money. So obviously there were many, many challenges, but that plantation owner is going to, obviously recognize the value and not mistreat as much as possible. If you look at these girls, how much are they worth? $200, $300? And why is that so insidious? It's because the brothel owner, well, if she resists or if she, puts up a fight, out she goes, or they beat her up, she's entirely disposable because she's so cheap I could just go out and get another one. And that's one of the problems that happens. These girls are so brutally beaten often, and they're really maimed. It's not just overseas. I did mention back home. So this is Alyssa. That's her street name. She was in Boston, living in a dysfunctional home. And, one day she was out in the streets. She's outside, late afternoon, early evening, and she saw this man who looked like a rapper to her. She thought he was really cool. He came up to her and said, wow, I'd like you to be my girlfriend. Well, 2 weeks later, she was a prostitute for him, even as she continued to go to school as a sophomore. So this happens here at home, too. And her journey was a really troubled journey, but she's now been able to testify against them, and so now they're in jail. But I just wanted to underscore that this trafficking issue is actually at home in a big way as well. The next issue is maternal health, maternal mortality. So somewhere in the world, it used to be that one woman died trying to give birth every single minute somewhere in the world. This is Mahabuba. Here in the U.S., childbirth is a wonderful thing, but in a place like Niger, 1 in 7 women can expect to die sometime in their lifetime trying to give birth. And for those who do die, there are 20 who survive with injury. Mind you, the number of deaths is really decreasing. So now 1 woman dies every 2 to 2.5 minutes. So we are making a lot of progress. But the type of injury that is really devastating for those who do survive but with injury is one of the most devastating is obstetric fistula. So this is Mahabuba. Mahabuba was 13 years old in Ethiopia at the time when she got married against her will, and she got pregnant against her will. So she ran off to the bush to have the baby. She had obstructed labor. the baby died, and she ended up with an obstetric fistula, which causes great damage to the inside. There's tearing of the walls. And so she actually became, an obstetric fistula means that you become incontinent. You cannot control your wastes. So she basically stank. Now, the villagers, of course, this is a very, uneducated group of villagers. They didn't know what happened to her, and they thought she was cursed. So what are they going to do with Mahabuba? They found a hut at the edge of the village. They put her in that hut, and they ripped off the door so that the hyenas would get her at night. So she found a stick in that hut, and the entire night she fought off those hyenas with that stick. She was 14 years old. And she knew that the next day, if she could just get to the nearest village, there was a foreign missionary who would just save her. And so she actually had some nerve damage. She couldn't actually walk, so she crawled. And at night, again, she would climb up the trees to spend the night in the trees so the hyenas would not get her again. She arrived half dead on the doorstep of the foreign missionary. He took one look at her. He knew exactly what had happened, rushed her off to the Addis Ababa hospital, and she was repaired in a series of operations. And, the doctors and the nurses noticed that this girl not only was a survivor, made of steel, but that she was also very clever. So they made her a nurse. So Mahabuba is now a nurse at the hospital, saving the lives of thousands of other women who face the same problems that she faced. She is paying back. She's now part of the solution. She's not the problem. She is, again, paying back in droves what someone gave to her. So, again, these women can become part of the solution in many ways. They just need to be given the chance. So here is Edna Adan. She's one of my favorite people because here is a woman who was the first lady of, she became the first lady of Somaliland. When she was young, her father was a doctor and her mother, did not have a formal job. And, the practice in that area is really to cut your children. But the father, who was a doctor, said, I don't want I don't want Edna to be cut. And so one time when he was out on a business trip out of town, the mother took Edna with her relatives, and they cut Edna. And when the father came back, Edna said it was the first time she had ever seen him shed tears. So Edna, though, was sent to school. She did brilliantly in school, and she became the first woman in her country to actually go off to the UK to study nursing. So she obviously was very, very talented. So she became immediately part of the rarefied circle in Somaliland, and hence she ended up being able to get married to the president of the country. So here she was. You think, oh my goodness, she could live the life. But things didn't work out so well, so she ended up getting divorced from her husband. And so she thought, well, what am I going to do with my life? She ended up going back to her roots in nursing and got a job as part of the WHO, the World Health Organization. She became a bureaucrat, traveling around the world, helping administer health policies. And then as she was about to retire, she thought, there's something in me that really, I have to do this before I die. And what it was is she wanted to create a maternity hospital. So she took her retirement money and she put it into this, building this hospital. She almost went bankrupt. I mean, there is no maternity hospital anywhere near, not only in Somaliland, but anywhere in that area. She was the first to even conceive of the idea. And, even starting from scratch, like, where am I going to build this hospital? She had to find some land. So she went to her former husband and said, can you give me some land? He said, what? What for? And then he said, I don't really have any land. And then he goes, well, there is a place. It's the old city dump. Do you want it? Edna grabbed it. And she started building it and went through a lot of trials and tribulations. But that white, gleaming building is the hospital that she built, that you see in this photograph. She's really quite an amazing woman. I'd like to show you a PBS trailer that has Edna and some other people in it that are really amazing women who have become part of the solution, not the problem. So if we could get the PBS trailer to show, that would be great. I think, here we go.
How we treat women and girls is absolutely essential to who we are as a people.
The issue of gender equality globally must be addressed if the problems that we share across the world are to be solved.
It's the way that we can bring greater peace and balance in this world.
We're at the point of freedom, and that means two things. One is it's maximum danger, and the other is we're not going to stop.
What Nick and Sheryl have been able to do is tell very compelling stories of people that they empathize with and understand in their context.
Well, I got an email. I remember like the subject being like Sierra Leone, and I opened that one because I was like, that's interesting. What's that all about? And then it was the invitation to come on board, and I immediately said yes. I love what Nick and Sheryl say in the book, that women are not the problem, they're the solution.
When I started reading what Half the Sky is about and what the message is and the story.
You are so beautiful and so smart. I know you'll be very successful.
You can't say no.
Maybe I shouldn't ask, but can I ask, did your husband ever hit you? No.
Because I'm very harsh.
Nick and Sheryl kind of revolutionized the way people talk about aid and made people very fired up and inspired, and certainly made me want to get out there and be a part of the movement.
So you were a commercial sex worker from when to when?
From 94 to 98.
I'm just curious how much you were paid for that work.
50 shillings.
It's a tough topic. The challenge that women and girls face around the world is not an easy topic to talk about, but we really think it is the moral challenge of the century.
Nick and Sheryl are out there talking about this issue, and not just talking about it theoretically, but they have all these stories about actual girls and women that are going through some of these struggles. That really brings it to life for a much wider audience.
Is that red door, is that a brothel, I think?
Yes, it is.
Do you have a supply of condoms here?
No, they don't have it. They have to buy it and
You have to buy condoms? As long as the victims are poor, rural, female, illiterate, they don't have voice.
Don't want to forget that.
To be physically present in a place is irreplaceable. Nicholas is right. You have to show up.
She's fine.
She is fine.
Okay. This is like a war map, a strategic map. Where do we need someone to fight the enemy? She doesn't have a radial pulse. Disease, death.
Celebrities can bring these issues into the limelight. That's just a no-brainer. That's your job, you know, to shine a little light on people that are actually doing the hard lifting.
Make that one I tell you, she's been sold.
But from a brothel or
from a brothel?
You can't come up with something more beautiful than a young, innocent girl. And to inflict that experience on that human being is unspeakably cruel.
So she had like 10, 12 plans a day. If she don't want it, they beat her. I want to empower survivors to stand up and say no. If they want to say no.
3-year-old.
It's a 3-year-old girl who has been raped and she's just come back for follow-up. Yeah.
We shouldn't allow the violence that is being inflicted on women to continue. It must stop, because it can't stop, and they need to be part of the solution.
Stay safe, okay? Sometimes the problem feels so big that changing one life doesn't feel like enough, but it is. So every person, every corner of this world needs to raise a voice and say this has to stop.
This is not rocket science. This is not a problem that is unsolvable, that we have to invent something new. It just takes political will.
The rights we want to choose our husbands. We want to own the land. We want to go to school. We don't want to be cut anymore. We want also to make decisions. We want to participate in politics, to be leaders. We want to be equal.
The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. If we are going to see real development in the world, then our best investment is women.
I do want to give you a reminder that, you know, it is hard to help people, and empowering people in this way is very hard. But I want to give you an example where it has worked. You all have seen China. China, they have really been able to empower women. If you think back to the economic revolution in China, it started with light industry. It was the clothes, the toys, the shoes, the apparel that were made in Chinese factories by women. Women were actually in those factories. I remember a manager saying, "We like women because their fingers are small and we can pay them less." But nonetheless, the Chinese women were able to help jumpstart the economic revolution that has become what we all know today, one of the most amazing runs of economic growth in history. The longest string of 10+% growth, stunning growth over the years. But, you know, so we've seen how it works, but you also have to have a country that accepts women into the formal labor force. And so that's also a thing to tackle. But it isn't as though the Chinese are, you know, inherently or naturally entrepreneurial. A century ago, they weren't. Even 50 years ago, they weren't. I think that what matters is the right incentives and the right incubation. And I think that if you empower women around the rest of the world and the rest of the developing countries, you actually can also trigger new economic growth. It would be great if Africa could industrialize. It would be quite stunning. But if you look at what's happened to China, I think it can really be a model for other places. But also a big challenge, as you all know. So China, of course, has phenomenal growth, and what that growth has done is actually lift more than 600 million people out of poverty, which is a stunning feat. I mean, that's almost twice the population of our country. And it's also stunning because just in the 1970s, China had 65% of its population in poverty. Now it's down to 8%. That's just an incredible change. But it also needs a lot of growth just to absorb all the new workers coming into the labor force. So we think that right now its growth is about 7.5, maybe 7, and that's low. Here we think, oh my goodness, that's still really high. But they need 7 to 8% just to absorb all those workers. So they are facing a huge problem. But during the run-up, during the great transformation of China, they have become a huge producer and a huge consumer. So they consume about 60% of the world's cement, and they also produce huge amounts. So the amount of steel that they make is a combined capacity of what the U.S., Japan, and India currently produce. It's a huge amount. The problem with China, though, is that it is doing this in every single sector. So it has now, because of the more slack growth, it has really the capacity to produce millions of tons of things that perhaps no one will buy. And so that is a huge problem that it faces. At the same time, it still needs to grow because their people have rising expectations. Of course, on a per capita basis, you know, China is still very far behind the U.S., but the people who have become enormously wealthy, the Chinese all know that and they want to get there too. So for instance, Zhang Xin, who runs one of the largest property conglomerates, some of you may have even worked with her or her husband, just bought 40% of the General Motors building in New York City with a Latin American partner. Chinese go to the Middle East by the busloads. A Hong Kong billionaire friend of mine was talking about how he was in the Al Arab hotel in Dubai, the most expensive hotel there. And he and his wife were saying, we could only afford lunch here. They stayed at another hotel, and they were eating lunch there. And they were finished lunch, they were walking into the main lobby, and they thought, my goodness, what it must be to actually stay here for a night, so expensive. And as they got to the entrance, they saw 3 buses pull up and unload their participants, and they were all from China, all going up to the registration desk to check in. You know what my Hong Kong billionaire friend said? He said, I felt poor. So there is an enormous amount of wealth being created, and that fuels the expectations, which are pretty remarkable. So let's look at what that means. If each Chinese aspires to the level of standard of living that we Americans have here, what happens? So I know you saw, photos yesterday of, what it's going to look like, all the pollution that's going to be created in China. But let's actually think some of these things through. So if the Chinese consumed the same amount of grain that we in America, that each American here consumes, which is about 2,000 pounds if you incorporate all the industrial use of grain, that would mean that that China alone would consume 2/3 of the current world's grain harvest every year. 2/3. Paper use. If Chinese aspire to use the amount of paper that each person in the U.S. uses, that level, that would be 300 million tons of paper a year. The world produces only 160 million tons of paper each year. There go the world's forests. How about car use? So we have, 3 cars for every 4 Americans here? So if China decided to have that many cars for each person, 3 cars for every 4 people in China, that would mean a fleet in China of 1.1 billion cars. The entire world's fleet of cars now is 800 million. Not to mention the parking lots, the roads, and the highways that you need to, enable all those cars to drive, to be driven. That would be the equivalent to the total area that China currently allocates for all of its rice, its main food staple. So it's a pretty stunning comparison when you think about in 20 years if China does try and want to be like Americans. It is clear that there is no way that they actually can adopt the same kind of automobile-focused, energy-consumptive economy that we have here in the U.S. And if China can't do that, what about India, whose population in 20 years is expected to be more than China's? So it is clear that we need to find a better solution, and that's where you come in. With the built environment, you obviously are great at designing things for energy efficiency and resource efficiency. So you have a great role to play in the future. But having said that, I still think that we do want to empower women. So not only that because they can aspire for a better standard of living, but also so that they can help on the road to conservation, because women actually can be pivotal in trying to save resources, especially energy consumption, which is inefficient in their own little area, even though they don't contribute overall to the world's share of energy consumption. So I do hope that on a professional basis you will contribute, but also on a personal basis that you will contribute to this cause. But then you might be asking, well, why? What's in it for me? Why should I care? And that's a really legitimate question. And to that I have two answers, and I'll close on this. One is that there are very few things in life that can actually elevate your level of happiness once you have all your material needs satisfied, which everyone here in this room does. There are very few things that can actually change your set point for happiness. One of those things is contributing to a cause larger than yourself. And research shows that when you are happier, you tend to live longer. That's a nice thing. The second thing is an anecdote. It's about a woman, an aid worker in Darfur. She saw things that no human being should see. And throughout her time there, she was strong, she was steadfast, she never broke down. She came back to the U.S. to visit her grandmother for Christmas, and she was in her grandmother's backyard. She saw something that made her break down in tears. What she saw was a bird feeder. A bird feeder. Here was a woman who had seen babies thrown into bonfires because of the color of their skin. And she realized that she had the great fortune of being born in a land where we take security for granted, where not only can we feed, clothe, and house ourselves, but even provide food so that wild birds don't go hungry in the winter. And she realized that with this great fortune comes great responsibility. And so, like her, you, me, we all have won the lottery of life. The question is, how do we discharge that responsibility? So, here's the cause. Join the movement. Feel happier. Live longer and help save the world. Thank you very much. I think there might be time for one or two questions. I don't know if people want to come up and ask a question. I don't know if there are any mics, but please go ahead. Can you stand up, perhaps? Okay, so the question is, what would be the impact of the population control relaxing in China? You know, it's hard to say because they haven't figured out how to implement it. They've announced this broad policy, and they don't exactly know how it's going to be implemented. In many ways, it's kind of been like that de facto. Certainly in the countryside and in the other areas, you're already allowed to have more children, you know, in certain areas in the countryside and in rural poor areas. If the first one is a girl, you can have another one, try for another one. There's also fines that people pay if they want to have more kids. So it's not exactly clear the impact, but they do need to loosen up the policy. This is, all of the experts say that it's just one child, so to speak, one child just really is really hurting the country's labor force in the future. And so they do need to loosen it up. So it's really a question of now, how do they implement it? It's not going to solve their problem. They still, there's just no way they can actually really change the trend of fewer, the birth, the number of children that women tend to have is still quite low, and there's no way they can drastically change that because of what they've done for the past 20 years. But they can actually maybe ameliorate this severity of it. So we'll see how it will be implemented. Thanks. Any other questions? Up in the back?
Hi, Sheryl.
Hi. Oh, you have a mic. Great.
I found the mic. Ed Saliga. I chair the board for the chapter in New Jersey. And I look at this, I see sustainability, the end of poverty, two faces, same issue. So what I can tell you is our chapter will take this on. And I don't really know how to even communicate that connection, and yet I have that sense, two faces, same issue. So could you say a little more about the conversation and what, how to speak so the sustainability people can understand that this is also our business.
Right. You know, of course, people in the developing world, you know, contribute a small portion of the carbon footprint, and it's really China and the U.S. But think about China 20 years ago, when it was also contributing such a small portion because it was really a developing country. And now it has become the largest emitter of, carbon. So, carbon emissions. And so if you think about where the developing countries will go to, India, for instance, you know, has the capacity to really become a large economy, depending upon how it manages its growth. So starting at the early stage, I mean, if China, and by saying this, I'm suggesting that the developing countries do this as well. If China had started out in the early years of its growth by trying to be environmentally cleaner, then it could have maybe tempered a lot of the pollution that exists all over the country. But I remember basically in the 1990s, China was saying, we are not going to sacrifice our economic growth just to clean the environment, just to have a clean environment. They actually said, look what the U.S. has done over the last 100 years, and you polluted, you know, ad infinitum. So why should we sacrifice our growth? So if everybody in the developing world has that attitude, it's going to be a real problem. So I think that incorporating that early on, is really important. And that's sustainability all over the world. And of course now in China and in India, there is more attention to sustainability, to using, alternative sources of energy, which they may not get to a huge portion of our overall consumption, but there are lots of things at the margin that start to add up in a pretty powerful way. I don't know if that answers your question.
It helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. I just had a question about the logistics of taking on this challenge. When you say that gender inequality is the main moral challenge of this century, it's a little terrifying because it has no epicenter and it almost seems so amorphous and so large. It's kind of scary to think that will we be able to really take this on in a meaningful way over the next 100 years. And obviously the things that you described are amazing, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the strategies of facing a problem that doesn't seem to have one front, but instead is spread so far culturally, geographically, and economically.
Right. No, I agree. It's a huge thing. And I don't think really it can have a driver. I do think that it has to be something that everybody, if they can incorporate it into their, their outlook, they can help, each person can help in a little way. So that's why you almost need a movement. You need help from the top down, from the bottom up, and from the middle. So you need people in the government, in the civilian society, in the corporate world, all coming together, not necessarily working together, but in their own way doing something to contribute to the cause. I mean, like if you look at over the centuries of our own Western culture, we have become much less violent. Think back to the days of Alexander the Great, and I'm going way back. But it was a great achievement to kill your first man at the age of 9. This is not our outlook anymore. So I do think that in that grand context, I think that we can change if people just, absorb this way of thinking and in their own sphere of influence try and bring about change. I don't think, you're right, I don't think that you can have a driver. There's just no one overarching thing, because this is across culture, and men and women have to work together to bring about this social change. It's working together. Boys and girls, men and women have to realize that, we want this to be a better place for all human beings, and it's kind of like it's a human right to really just want to be educated and to be brought into the formal labor force and to be treated like, like other human beings too. So I hope that addresses it.
Thank you.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to the question right before the last one, you hear so many stories about women who are empowered and how they take that empowerment through education, through microloans, and they bring it back to their children, their communities, to try and build a better life. And so it sort of seems to me that the link between Half the Sky and sustainability is that part of women's education is their understanding that it's the food that they will put on the table
Absolutely.
for their families, but also their contribution to sustainable growth. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk about that connection.
No, I mean, that's absolutely it. I mean, you've hit it. I mean, that's also for here in the U.S. and in the Western world. It's one thing for, the women who live in the villages who are not very educated, and, if they want to get light. I mean, you can't electrify all of Africa, but you might be able to have them use solar power a little bit more. Now they can get small battery-powered solar lights, but maybe there's instead of electrifying all of the country, there are other more sustainable ways for delivering energy. But obviously here in the U.S., we use a lot more energy, and so it is incumbent upon us to actually contribute to trying to conserve or think of alternative ways of being much more efficient. So I think that's, I'm supposed to wrap up. So thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate it. Thank you.